Well, I think we're still very much on the after the shock of the Boris Johnson hearing. I mean, we watched all 4 hours for it. I mean, I did a sort of a surprise Thursday morning walk to sort of go, wow, that was certainly an interesting committee hearing, that's for certain. And someone else, said it that there were a couple of times where Johnson got really, really heated, and it looks like they were saved by the division bell. And it would have been very interesting to see if that bell had not rung at that time, if Johnson would have gotten even more heated and angry at the questions that he was being asked. And of course, today we're going to have a look at Conservative Home. And not just this video today. In fact, the next one will also be from Conservative Home as well, because I think their take on the vote of the Windsor framework is somewhat interesting, shall we say. But yes, we're going to go over this. And as I always say when we cover Conservative Home, why are we covering this? Well, partly because, as I say all the time, this blog, this sort of is very, very influential to not only the Conservative Party, but the non-parliamentary Conservative Party as well. And remember, it was those polls that they'd been doing for quite a while, which pretty much predicted that it would go down to a Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss leadership election. They'd been predicting that for quite a while. So there is a very, very big reason why I sort of look at this and I sort of pay attention to Conservative Home. And I don't agree, to be honest, with much of their writers, and that's why we go over it, because it's a good sort of chance to sort of have a bit of a rebuttal about this and about the stuff they put out. But today they've put out their version of not their version, but what their thoughts, shall we say, of the Boris Johnson trial indeed. So let's go into it and find out what they had to say. But before we do that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. And of course, do remember to ring the bell as well. And of course, down below, there's a link to my Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And of course, the one-off donation link from YouTube called the Thank You button. There is the also Pony Club as well. You can join the YouTube subscription side as well. And like I say, if you join either the Patreon or the YouTube stuff, we have done sort of a lot of video content library for you guys as well. We do one every Wednesday, so there's a fresh one out just yesterday. But we're not covering Boris Johnson. So I thought, we're probably going to be a heavy Johnson week anyway. So something a little bit different for the Pony Clubbers and of course the Patreon members as well. So on we go to cover this on Conservative Home. The title of yesterday's hearing confirmed that Johnson's suspension from the Commons would be an act of politics, not justice. Interesting take indeed. So, Ali Kemal was a liberal politician during the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, whose life came to a grisly end when he was lynched by a mob. There is no shortage of people willing to deal the same fate, metaphorically at least, to the British politician who is Kemal's great-grandson, Boris Johnson. Odd way to start. Odd way to start that. But like I say, Johnson has no one to blame but himself for those feelings. He has no one to blame for himself for those feelings. And bear in mind, I'd like to remind the writer how often it has been Johnson himself who likes to take revenge. I wonder if we'll get mentioned about about what Johnson said about trying to bring Rishi Sunak into the whole Partygate scandal again. That would be interesting. So, the aftermath of yesterday's evidence session before the Select Committee on the Privileges will see their number swell even further. For the core of the former Prime Minister's defence is that the COVID rules and guidance urged so inflexibly on others should not have been applied flexibly. Should have been applied flexibly to him, or at least to those responsible for drawing them up and presiding over them. And I agree, that was his whole defense. It's, as we said, as it's been said before, it's rules for thee and not for me. And everyone sort of feels very much a lot of outrage. I still think the Conservatives really do not understand the amount of anger that there still is over Partygate. and that even this trial, let alone the forthcoming COVID inquiry, where that state starts to take witness testimony and evidence, and eventually what that will put out will also be massively damaging to the Conservatives, massively so. So, for those who suffered family death or even personal loss during the pandemic, and those with a cynical eye for how the political process works at any time, the familiar cry is going up. One law for them, another for us. That is also being taken up by those who simply hate Johnson or want revenge for Brexit, or both. Or both. And it doesn't invalidate the truth of it. So, let the realization sink in that had he not been forced out of Downing Street by his party, Johnson would be in place today, and we would thus be facing this prospect of a prime minister who was felled by a recall petition and a by-election. Who would have succeeded him, and how, with no time for the Conservative leadership election that the party's constitution requires? So again, worrying about, well, uh, I like that. I like the fact that he's like, well, okay, guys, I know a lot of you are still miffed that you got rid of Boris Johnson, and that is actually quite true. There are a lot of people still in the non-parliamentary Conservative Party who do still feel the sting of the way that Johnson was gotten rid of, and now she's trying to remind that audience, hey, look, if we hadn't got rid of him then, we would be facing that. The fall of a potential prime minister who would have been sat there, gotten rid of a recall petition, and then a potential by-election. What would we have done? What situation would our party have been in then? And I think that's very well worth reminding the Conservative Party of the position they would have been in had that been the case, had the Conservative Party decided not to ditch Johnson when they did. So, let's continue. Nevertheless, the question that many MPs may have to vote on sooner rather than later will not be whether Johnson should be Prime Minister, nor in the future. It won't even be whether he and others in number 10 were right to act during COVID as they did. It will be what penalty should be exacted if the committee decides the committee is contempt in that he had committed a contempt in misleading the Commons. So now Johnson himself concedes that he did mislead the House, but he disputes that he did so intentionally or recklessly or both. The words in quotes are the committees and they constitute the heart of its inquiry. And to cut a long story short, he yesterday deployed the three wise monkeys defense, so to speak. Hear no parties, see no parties, speak no parties. Or as we like to call it yesterday, the idiot defense. Yeah. You're all right that you pointed out the rules, and it was certainly one rules that was enforced very rigidly for others, and then apparently Johnson wanted flexibility for himself. That was very, very clear in his whole defense argument he was giving. And it's kind of funny because 10 years ago, when Boris Johnson was mayor of London, there's a recent piece doing the rounds of a guy who wrote to Johnson complaining about the expansion of the green zone, being fined for this. And Johnson actually wrote back to this guy when he was mayor of London saying, well, sorry, but ignorance is no defense under the law. You should have had to go out and find out what those rules are. You have no defense. So the penalty still stands, which you won't be surprised is doing the rounds a lot quite now if you've seen it recently, certainly on Twitter. And I've got it sort of stacked up in my YouTube sort of message thing that will be coming out soon as well. So, in sum, the events that he attended and the inquiry is probing were, in his view, and with one exception, events organised to thank Downing Street staff, which he was therefore obligated to attend. He wasn't. It's not the Prime Minister's job to oversee a farewell party, and even then, why were these events necessary for work? They absolutely weren't. I guarantee you, you will not find a single farewell party that went on during the pandemic. There might have been ones that happened online, but none of them will have happened in person. So to think that this was a necessary work event, as Johnson seems to be claiming they were, is that's a long shot. But anyway, it continues. He says that they were within the rules and the guidelines because of number 10's layout made social distancing hard, if not impossible. By imperfection, they were therefore what Sue Gray in her report called social gatherings. And by the way, it's worth pointing out that in passing, the committee's inquiry is not contrary to the claims of some of the former Prime Minister's supporters invalidated by her Labour sympathies. It has collected its own evidence. That is to say that however unpopular it might be to admit it, Johnson has had has a case here, at least if the actions of the police were anything to go by. For it is significant that he was fined by only them once for the sole event which he couldn't possibly reasonably have claimed to be thanking staff, the impromptu birthday event by which he was, quote, ambushed by cake. And even then, I would say it doesn't matter if the police only find him once. The fact that he was at these events, he said to the committee, and the committee asked him, did you know what the rules and regulations were at the time? Yes, I did. When you were at these events, why were you not enforcing them? Or at least realizing that this was not an acceptable work event, and that this was never going to come off how this was come off. There's a real sense here that Johnson feels as if he's done nothing wrong. And that came across very clear in the committee. And as we've said before, the anger that was just around Partygate has not subsided. And if anything, this is going to bring back a lot of that anger. Certainly not against just Boris Johnson, but the Tories as well. That is for sure. You can guarantee for that. So the Met may not be the gold standard for anything much, but their decision suggests that Johnson's take on the parties, or whatever you want to call them, is held only by him. Furthermore, he argues that the pictures we've seen of them don't usually come from the spuriously held staff mobiles, but from Downing Street's official photographer. In one case, he pointed out the photos were even published in the Times. No one said at the time that it was against the rules, and Number 10 wouldn't have published it had it believed this to be the case. Indeed, his apology to the Commons last year strikes a conciliatory note, since the thrust of his argument is that there is nothing to be sorry for. And that is going to cause a lot of anger, because he still, when he was given the opportunity to update the record and set the record straight to the committee, when he was offered, he said no. He still thinks he has nothing to be sorry for. And the anger that is still there is gonna be quite significant. And bear in mind, we've still got the COVID inquiry to come. There is going to be an awful lot of bad news heading the Tories' way. Like I say, this whole thing is going to damage the Tories in some way. Maybe not, obviously, as much as it would if Johnson was Prime Minister, but it's still going to bring them a lot of bad headlines. Absolutely. So Johnson said last year that with hindsight, he should have behaved differently. But please note that there was a reference to an event in Downing Street's garden on the 20th May of 2020, not to be confused with the gathering of the 15th of May that year, which may have been covertly photographed from Number 11. This takes us to the nub of the case that the committee seems to be building against the former Prime Minister. That if I was going 100 miles an hour and I saw the speedometer say going 100 miles an hour, it would look a bit odd, wouldn't it, if I said somebody assured me that I was not, Harriet Maharman asked. In other words, Johnson should have known, and by implication known perfectly well, that at least some of these events he attended were loosely speaking parties, and thus, with the rules and the guidance in the committee's view, at least, what on earth did he think he was walking into when he saw the tables laden with bottles and glasses? That's exactly the point. That was the thing they were building up yesterday. That's why they asked him 3 times, and Johnson said he agreed with them 3 times what the rules were at that time. What did he think he was walking into? The committee's chair appeared to be establishing to her satisfaction that since Johnson saw what was happening, he went on to intentionally mislead the House. The Albert Costello line of questioning that suggested that the Alberto Costa's line of questioning suggested that by not seeking assurances from lawyers, the former Prime Minister acted recklessly. All this may take the committee towards recommending a suspension over 10 days, leading probably to a recall petition and a by-election. That is potentially the route where we're going. And like I say, if he does go to a by-election, there's a big chance Johnson doesn't win that. There's a very big chance Johnson does not win that. But of course, here we get the ConservativeHome's piece to this. So, my objection to the proceedings against Owen Paterson, rightly or wrongly, was based on the unfairness of the recall procedure, a wretched product of the worst of the coalition government. Constituencies ought not to require MPs' permission for recall. So, in one sense, the present arguments are too restrictive, but the threshold for a by-election petition ought to be higher than 10%. So, in another, they are too relaxed. Either way, Johnson now faces the distinct possibility of such a poll. And again, he's arguing against sort of the rules, whether or not it's fair Johnson to face that. He's saying, oh, the threshold's too low. The threshold's too low. Oh, so, which is a reminder that the proceedings to which Johnson is subject are political, not judicial. Again, I think that should be obvious to the fact that is the case. That, Johnson was not in a court of law, so it was never judicial. This was parliamentary procedure. MPs police themselves. Whether we like it or not, MPs police themselves. So this entirely was not political, but it was not judicial either. It was very much something in between, I would say, rather than one or the other. And I hope that in saying that, I am not committing some heinous contempt of Parliament or casting any aspersions on the impartiality of Harman, her colleagues, or their inquisitorial procedure. Okay. For the committee itself makes the point that the inquiry was established by vote in the Commons and that its recommendations will be put to a vote in the Commons. In other words, the story of this inquiry is fundamentally a story about politics because votes in Parliament cannot be other than political. Okay, I'll agree if that's what you want to. That's the case. That's what you wouldn't want to make it. That's why it's political. Then okay, I can say that's the case. But then what? So 11 days suspension or more, or likely by-election. 10 days suspension or fewer, or no recall petition. If Johnson did act intentionally or recklessly, what mathematical formula marries offences to days? How many hours penalty for not consulting a lawyer? How many minutes for turning a blind eye to booze and the booze-heaped table? In the end, we'll all fall back on our own procedures. That's why the procedures exist. That's what they'll be running on, That's what they will be looking at. They are run by procedures. That's just how it works. Like it or not, that's procedure. So, I've been very wish-bish about my old Telegraph and parliamentary colleague in my time, but what passed through Johnson's mind may sometimes be a mystery even to him. And Charles Walker raised the fascinating possibility in his questioning that the former Prime Minister may have spoken recklessly, but not misled intentionally. There should also be a high bar for exposing anyone to the flawed recall procedure, yoked by happenstance to a legitimate parliamentary inquiry. I hope the Conservatives on the committee take the point. After all, they're making up the majority, so its decision is effectively in their hands. And he does make that point very clear. Johnson's fate is in those, like I say, Conservative hands. Like I say, it's four Conservatives, 2 Labour, 1 SNP. That's how sort of the committee is made up. And ultimately, yeah, it is in their hands. Whether they will punish him or not, I don't know. I think, to be honest, if they don't, a lot of people I think are going to see this as a whitewash, that you let Johnson get away with it. And right now, you know full well that those 2 Labour and the SNP guy, they're voting to punish Johnson. So that's 3 votes. So that means that if 2 go to 2 of those Conservatives vote to punish, that's 5 votes. Johnson is done. If 2 of those Conservatives vote to punish, that's Johnson done. If it's 1, then yeah, hang on. That would make it 4-3. So you would only need 1 to vote to punish, or to say that yes, Johnson is guilty in that regards. That's all it would take, just 1 flipping. And I get the impression, certainly yesterday, certainly that's how I feel. Like I say, Johnson's performance was not a good one. Overall, like I say, they didn't really talk about how Johnson sort of performed. They talk about a bit of defense, the idiot defense, the 3 monkeys defense. You know, see no parties, hear no parties, say no parties, as he said. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think Johnson should be punished. I think his performance yesterday made that crystal clear. Maybe he didn't do it intentionally, but there's certainly elements of recklessness that he certainly did seem to do. You get obviously the questioning about, well, why didn't you seek further assurances? Which is what we were saying yesterday when we were looking over his defense. Why did you only just rely on one person's say so? Why didn't you get, someone else? And even then, when they were asking him to sort of confirm, did you know what the rules and regulations were at the time? They said, yes, I do. Then why at these parties did you not say anything? Did you not even ask yourself that question? Were these following the rules and guidance? I will tell you now. ConservativeHome here is definitely fence sitting. they're trying to fence sit massively there. Certainly calling out the recall petition and the potential by-election that could happen. No, that's not fair. It's only sort of 5-10%, but look how low turnout numbers are. I can't blame them for putting it that low, especially when we've seen some of the by-election turnouts be very low as well, lower than they normally would be for a general election as well. So, but anyway, that's probably a discussion for another time. But yeah, that seems to be ConservativeHome's take on this. Whether they will, someone else will publish something else on this, I don't know. I will look and I will keep my eye out to see what they do. But overall, I think Johnson is done. And of course, I think it's very likely this committee is going to find him guilty. I really don't see how they do not. But like I say, we'll have to see what the committee says and on what they say when that comes out. But we will wait and see. But I highly suspect it might not be too long. Highly suspect, unless, of course, the people that, Johnson's been throwing under the bus decide to come out and speak and said, okay, hold on, guys. We actually said this, and this. We'll see. But as always, until then, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, again, links down below to help support the channel in a different way. And of course, as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.